He was a reserve deputy in Virginia, meaning he did this job for free. He had a very close call with the Beltway snipers that almost cost him his life. He saved lives, and remember, he did all that for free. And he's here to tell his story on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Welcome to the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. In the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show, we are joined by special guests talking about their experiences, the realities of investigating crimes, plus those who have experienced horrendous trauma. Police, first responders, military, and victims of crime share their stories. Hi, I'm John J. Wiley. In addition to being a broadcaster, I'm also a retired police sergeant. Be sure to check out our website, letradio.com, and also like us on Facebook. Search for the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. The Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show is brought to you in part by Colonial Metals Group. They provide help with the goal of protecting your financial future by having a self-directed IRA where you can safely store gold and silver. Assets that have stood the test of time, no matter what. Call Paul and his staff at Colonial Metals Group to learn how to get started. Call 800-898-1841. 800-898-1841. That's 800-898-1841. Or go online to colonialmetalsgroup.com/LET Radio. Contact is from Virginia. We have Richard Groover on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Richard is a really interesting case. And when I say an interesting case, he's an interesting guy with a tremendous backstory. What I want you to realize is he was a reserve deputy. In addition to being a college professor, he did policing for free. I mean for free. And he put his life on the line, which we're here to talk about. Richard, thank you for your service. Very much appreciated.
I'm glad to talk to you today.
And I'm really thrilled that you are sharing your story on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Before we get into it, look, I got to ask you this question, and I don't want to come off as there's something wrong with you. Why would you do this job for free?
Well, I had been a volunteer in several organizations in my career, and the local sheriff's department in Hanover County, Virginia, had put out a notice that they are going to have and had some reserve deputy sheriffs, which are fully sworn. We had beats that we would patrol. We looked like the regular deputies and all of that. So it sounded interesting, and so I decided to sign up for them and went through 6 months of training, similar to what you go through, any police officer goes through in law enforcement preparation.
And for those who don't know, Hanover County, Virginia is just north of Richmond. And as a matter of fact, Richard and I were laughing because I went to high school not far from there. And I got my very first speeding ticket from a Virginia State Trooper when I was 16 years of age in Ashland, Virginia, which is in Hanover County. That's
right. Well, we surround Ashland, and it is still portions of it are still rural, and, you know, when you're on patrol in the rural sections, you don't have a lot of backup near you. But we do have some more urban areas that are more similar to a typical suburban type of atmosphere and area, so a variety.
I'm sure you guys, and say guys, that means men and women, had to handle everything. And the rural areas are one thing. And when you're by yourself and you get a car stop and it goes south, let's just say on 95 or 301 or one of those places, and you're all by yourself, backup can be a long ways away.
Well, that's very true. In fact, I would always work New Year's Eve so that the regular deputies could be home with their family, and that would get pretty busy. We usually had a lot of arrests, and there were many times where I might be the only deputy left in a 100-square-mile area. And so, but sometimes, you know, I'd have to take that last one, that last DUI, and we'd go to jail.
One of the questions, and I got to ask you this again, I'm not judgy when I say this. It sounds that way. Policing took a terrible toll on me, mentally, physically, everything else. You did this job for free. I mean, you didn't get paid at all, did you?
One year we got $1 to try to put us on the insurance to cover our insurance, but that later was worked out with the lawyers. And so for 20 years and 15 days, I did it for free.
Did you get a pension? Did you get anything out of this other than a great experience?
No, just enjoyed doing it, and I do still miss it. You know, I see things happen, and I would love to jump in and slap the cuffs on somebody, but I don't have that authority anymore.
Right. Look, I know exactly what you mean. My career got ended due to violence. I was 33. I was over, and every now and then my wife, who I met years after retiring from police work, says to me, you know, it's not your job anymore, and let someone else deal with that. Let the young people deal with that, and I have to get my mindset right.
Well, you're right. You do take that kind of an attitude, but it is the way of getting older. And, of course, now I'm paying for it. I don't have a human right knee anymore. That got replaced. And my lower spine is messed up from all the fights and such. But I did have a great time doing it. And, you know, if you don't like people and you don't like doing it, you shouldn't do it.
Right. Because if you don't like them to start with, you're not going to like them later. Trust me on that one. And here's one other thing I'm sure you'll agree with, and this actually happened. It's not happened very often. But my wife and I were driving in Palm Beach County, Florida, many, many years ago, and I saw a police officer in Boynton Beach, Florida, in a fight with a suspect on a car stop. And we were driving like a Chevy Suburban at the time. And I was heading, I said, opposite direction. I said, hang on. We went over the median into the curb, and I jumped out there, and let's just say we got it subdued. The guy subdued very quickly. Once I knew the officer had everything in control, got him cuffed, the backup was there, I left, not a word was spoken. I would do that any day. Being an old man, I would still do that. When I see an officer on the side of the road, I always look.
Well, I would probably do the same thing, although I'm now 75 and I'm physically pretty beat up. I'm not sure I could help very much, but absolutely. And even though I'm retired and I'm asked to qualify with my gun every year, I do qualify with it, but you just have to take a different attitude in retirement that you're not that's not your job anymore.
No. I always tell people, and number one, there were knuckleheads before I started policing. There were knuckleheads after I finished policing, and there were knuckleheads I arrested many times. There were still knuckleheads, even after it was over. And you're not going to change that. And here's the last thing. Before we get into your story about the Beltway snipers and saving lives in car accidents, do you ever sit there and struggle with the Superman thing? You know, realizing I coulda, shoulda, woulda. I'm not God. I'm not Superman. I did the best I could, and leave it at that.
No, I never had that kind of feeling about it at all. The only thing that I was concerned about when I was before I got into it and when I got into it is I worried about seeing somebody abusing a prisoner. And, you know, we've had all those sort of cases that have come up in the media. And I'm happy to say that I never, ever, ever saw a Hanover County Sheriff's Department personnel mistreat a prisoner. And, you know, if it was something warranted, I'll give you an example. One time I arrested a guy, and we didn't have cages in our car.
We're going to take a short break. Can we return that conversation after the break? We're talking with Richard Groover. He is a retired reserve deputy from Hanover County, Virginia, also a semi-retired college professor and author of numerous books, which we'll talk about in a little bit. You can find us on Facebook. Look for and like the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show Facebook page. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Colonial Metals Group has helped me create a self-directed IRA where I can have direct access to my assets. Let the team of experts, Paul and his staff at Colonial Metals Group, help you protect your family's future, giving you great information for free. Their level of professionalism and ability to listen make it easy for you to learn everything you need to know about preserving all you work for. Call Paul or staff at Colonial Meadows Group, 800-898-1841, 800-898-1841. That's 800-898-1841, or go online to colonialmeadowsgroup.com/LET radio. Remember, let Paul and his staff at Colonial Meadows Group give you more information.
How do you start your day? After grabbing a cup of coffee, I grab my phone and open the Clubhouse social audio app and go right to the Breakfast with Champions rooms. I get what I need to start my day the right way in the Breakfast with Champions rooms on the Clubhouse social audio app. Best of all, the Clubhouse social audio app is free, and so are the Breakfast with Champions rooms. So download the Clubhouse social audio app and join me in the Breakfast with Champions rooms.
Return our conversation with Richard Gruber on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Richard is retired reserve deputy from Hanover County, Virginia. He's also a semi-retired college professor, author of numerous books. When I say reserve deputy, he did this job for free. And I got to ask you if you need your head examined doing police work for free. And I know, jokingly, I loved it too. So you don't have to answer that. Before we went to break, though, you started talking about this story, and this is something I get all the time, Richard. We didn't tolerate nonsense. We didn't tolerate abuse or violence against arrestees. We didn't tolerate corruption. That was unheard of in Baltimore. And granted, we all have bad days, but that was not something that was an issue. And when I try to tell people that, they're like, yeah, Thin Blue Line, you're lying. You were saying that you never experienced that at all either.
Absolutely didn't. But sometimes you had to use force to resolve a situation. I had a subject once I'd arrested, and I believe it was during a bar fight outside of one of our local bars. And so we always carried our prisoners up on the front seat because we didn't have cages.
Right.
So he's sitting beside me in the patrol car, and he suddenly decides, and he's handcuffed, and he's seat belted, and suddenly he decides to start kicking my radio and the dashboard area of the car. So I had to pop him in the face to get him to stop. But and we've had cases where somebody would start fighting and be aggressive about being arrested. And I was involved several times with other deputies where we literally had to take the person and turn them upside down and handcuff them, their arms behind their back to their feet, and carry them like a sack of potatoes in the back seat. So, you do what you have to do. When you place them under arrest, that's it.
Right, exactly.
And you go from there.
One of the things, and there's a term that a lot of people throw around, police brutality. And I always say, number one, use of force always looked ugly. It didn't matter if you hit someone one time, 50 times, or somewhere in between. It didn't matter. It looked ugly. You're going to look bad. Make sure that you were justified in what you did before you did it. When the handcuffs went on, it was over. It didn't matter. But what I always say to Richard is, what do you call it when criminals are brutal? There's no word for that. There's no catchphrase that people throw around when it comes to that kind of violence. Yeah,
that's right. Well, and many police officers, when you're, I won't say many, but on numerous occasions, they want to fight. And, if you don't mind that, and I have been around people that didn't like it, and of course they got out of the business. But if you don't mind getting physical, you have to do that sometimes.
Right.
And that's the way it works.
And we had a saying, and I learned this as a rookie from old timers. And you're a little bit older than me, but I was trained by a lot of combat veterans, Vietnam veterans that were police. And we had a few command staff that were Korean War veterans. And I got into a John Wayne fist fight with two guys, and I was a rookie police. And this old timer came up and he backed me up, and when everything was done, he laid me out. He ripped into me. He said, number one, don't you ever do that. If you need to go hands on someone, that's what your nightstick is for. That's what your mace is for. And you got to be swift, sure, and ultra-violent and be done.
You're right. And, of course, one of the great tools that we had, and you just mentioned it, was the mace or the spray we had. And what a lot of civilians don't know is before you're allowed to carry that, you have to be sprayed with it. So during a training session, you're lining up and they spray it right in your face. And it's a very miserable experience, but they train you because if you ever do use it on a subject and the wind's blowing, you're going to get covered with it as well. And they wanted you to understand what it was going to be like so you could react appropriately in that engagement.
So let's go shift gears. The Beltway Snipers, for those who are not familiar, just do a quick Google search. And I remember watching that. I've been long retired from police work. And I remember the area because I went to high school, that part of Virginia. But Ashland, Virginia, there was some shootings there. And that was in the area where you were policing. Am I wrong?
That is correct. I had gone to a particular restaurant that's no longer in Ashland and have dinner. And my wife and daughters were away out of town, and I'm coming back into town. And so I went up there to have dinner. And when I walked out of the restaurant, I came to the back parking lot area where I was parked. I was in plain clothes, but I did have my gun on in a fanny pack. I took that off, got in the car, pulled out onto Route 54, which was the frontage road, and Lee Boyd Malvo was in the woods about 30 yards from me. And after I got out on Route 54, he took the shot and shot the guy in the abdomen. Now, I'm certainly a big enough target, and I guess it was just a timing thing. I was lucky he didn't shoot me at the time. But, you know, I did have some feelings later. And after we found out where he was and it occurred about 30 minutes later, I put on my uniform, went up there and helped with what we were doing in the area. And I thought about that later. If I had come out of the restaurant after the man that he shot, maybe I could have killed Malvo, because I certainly would have put as many shots as I had in my gun in the woods where the shot came from. But, you know, it was just fortunate I didn't get shot, and, you know, we moved ahead. And eventually Malvo was caught. And, of course, the adult that was running him was executed up in Maryland when they finally caught them. And Malvo is now in the prison, I believe, in Virginia. And he's trying to because he was a juvenile at the time, he's trying to get out of prison or get something. But I don't think there's any way they're ever going to let him out because they killed a number of people. Yeah. And Lee Boyd Malvo is the one who killed him.
And for those who aren't familiar with what we're talking about, and there's a lot of people that are born after this, and they may not know it. They were driving around in an older Chevy Caprice. They had a hole, and the back seat was modified so they could lay down through the trunk.
It was in the trunk.
Use the trunk of the car and fire through that hole, and people wouldn't see them. They didn't know where the shots are coming from. But in your instance,
that's right.
Lee Boyd Malvo was in the woods, and he was a little bit different from what they did.
That's right. And this one incident in Ashland, Virginia, he was laying in the woods just a few feet off of the parking lot and waiting to take the shot. And the reason we know where he was is because later when we went back and searched the area, I didn't do the searching, but we found a candy bar wrapper that had his DNA on it. So we knew exactly where he was when he took the shot.
And when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about the after effects of that because, well, there's got to be some. You were so close. Luck has a lot to do with it. Timing, I don't know. I don't have the answers. We were talking with Richard Groover. He's a retired reserve deputy from Hanover County, Virginia, meaning he did his job for free. He had a close call with the Beltway Snipers, which he just talked about. He's a semi-retired college professor as well, and author of numerous books. We return to our conversation with Richard on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. We're going to talk about saving lives, how police do that all the time, and a lot of misconceptions about police. This is Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
I start my day a couple of times a week with the Breakfast with Champions rooms, which are free, and on the Clubhouse app, which is also free. I get motivation, guidance, and inspiration for my personal and professional life. Plus, I get to interact and even ask questions from celebrities, all in the Breakfast with Champions rooms in the Clubhouse app. The app and Breakfast with Champions is free. Download the app today, and I will see you in the Breakfast with Champions rooms on the Clubhouse app.
Our sponsor, Colonial Metals Group, helped me with my goal of protecting my financial future. Being at the whim of the stock market or the current administration doesn't make me feel safe or secure, but having a self-directed IRA where I can safely store gold and silver, assets that have stood the test of time, no matter what the economy or government policies are, makes sense to me. Call Paul and his staff at Colonial Metals Group to get more information. Call 800-898-1841, 800-898-1841. That's 800-898-1841, or go online to colonialmetalsgroup.com/LET radio. Return our conversation with Richard Groover on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. He is a retired reserve deputy from Hanover County, Virginia. Reserve deputy means, in that case, free. Some places have part-timers where they earn income. You guys did not earn it at all. We'll talk about how that's amazing in a moment. He's also a semi-retired college professor, author of numerous books. And before we went to break, he's talking about his close call with Lee Boyd Malvo, shooting at a restaurant in Ashland, Virginia, right after he exited that restaurant. Do you ever ask yourself, Richard, why me? Why was I spared and others were not?
Well, I think it was simply a case of timing, because what happened, John Mohammed, his adult guy, was over about a mile away on a main road, and he was firing a gun off, a handgun, and everybody was on alert back then. And so what the strategy was is if there were any police around where the kid was, that would draw them away from the kid so he could take the shot. And so it was simply a matter of timing. I never feared death. What I feared was getting injured. Mm-hmm. That's the only thing and being disabled. So it's just something I didn't think about. And, whenever you get in a car and log in and go on duty, you have to change your entire mindset to think about, well, tonight I might die or I might get hurt. But you just have to behave that way to do the job. And if you fear that, you shouldn't be doing it.
Right. We had a saying that if I really wrap my hands around the potential what could happen, we'd never leave the police car or never leave the station. We knew the threats were there, but I always had the mindset it's going to happen to someone else, not me. But I did live with the fear of severe injury. And a lot of people don't seem to understand, and I hate to say it, when an officer is killed in line of duty, the family gets insurance, they get their full pay, they get a lot of benefits, they're taken care of financially. When you are injured and your career's over, you're on your own.
That's right. And I would bet that many people who served a number of years, as they get older, you are feeling the pain. I eventually had to have one of my knees replaced. It's all plastic and metal. And, you have back pain from the fight. But I still loved it so much. Knowing all that now, I would still do it again. It was a lot of fun.
There's a young police officer. I say young, and we can say that now. I'm 65. You're 75. A young police officer, a female police officer in Louisiana, 44 years of age. She dropped dead of a heart attack. And we know that heart disease is a real issue for police. Stress, shift work, long hours, eating poorly, being on the job, all those things play a part. and that took her out. And I didn't really think about that until I started getting older. How about you?
Yeah, it's the same. It's the same here. Of course, I quit eating donuts.
Yeah. Well, for a while, that's all there was. When I worked midnight shift, nothing else was open.
Yeah.
And when you had to find something to eat, you had to throw something down your throat. So it was usually
lot of fast.
That's
a
right.
lot of places that are 24 hours that you can get some food. And but you're right. It does change sort of your behavior and your consumption of meals.
Oh yeah, and so I feel so badly for her family, and the agency as well. Now, as a couple old timers talking, we can go through the blood and gut stuff, and that's all part of the story. But a lot of, and I say this all the time, the vast majority of police work we did was quality of life issues. It wasn't arresting criminals. And we arrested criminals, the vast majority of the time we arrested criminals, they weren't violent. However, the violent ones could change your world for sure. But we had more domestics, we had more traffic accidents. And I don't think a lot of people realize the amount of quality of life issues we deal with and actually saving lives. And you went through that as well.
That's true. And I think that I really think that police departments and sheriff's departments today ought to put more publicity out about those particular incidences. And one particular one I remember, it was a February, it was freezing cold, and I was leaving an area where there'd been a local bar that was had a lot of business. And no doubt somebody in the bar got drunk, and he ran through a T-bone intersection and crashed in the woods. And when we heard about it and I responded, we got there, and the front windshield was broken out where somebody had cracked their head against it. The driver door was open. And so the other deputy that responded with me said, well, it looks like he climbed out, and so let's clear up and whatnot. I said, no, I think I'm going to look around in the woods. He had actually crashed into the wooded area. I think I'm going to look around and see if I can find him. And sure enough, I found him, and he did not have a coat on. It was probably in the 20 degrees or 30 degrees at least, freezing cold, and he was passed out. I know he would have frozen to death if I had not found him. And so it's cases where police officers save lives. I think that every time I arrested somebody for a DUI, and for a while I had the record as a reserve deputy of arrests on DUIs, you may have saved somebody's life because every traffic accident I ever worked with fatalities, somebody was drunk.
Yeah.
And so that's again, I think every arrest for a DUI, you don't want to mess up somebody's life, but you maybe save somebody's life, maybe theirs, because they didn't wreck and kill somebody.
And you were doing this at a time we had a tremendous transition in American policing, at least nationwide that I remember. When it came to drunk drivers, there was a certain type of latitude you try to give them. And then... Oh,
I didn't give any. If I pulled you over and I felt that you were drunk, and of course you had field sobriety tests, you might even have a breathalyzer that you, by the way, couldn't use as evidence in the case. But if I suspected you were drunk driving, we went to jail. You don't let anybody off because when you mark out with that car and that license plate, and it's in the record, and you let somebody go, and then they go down the road and kill somebody, you're screwed.
And that's exactly what I was getting
for
at.
Everything you're worth.
Was mad, and I'm a firm believer in what they do. They started suing police officers that gave people breaks that then turned around and got in their car drunk and had accidents and killed people, and it changed the game. Another one was domestic violence. There was a big case in Connecticut that changed the way we dealt with that across the United States. Before, it was a certain thing that we all did. Afterwards, If we felt that someone's going to get harmed, they're going to jail. Someone's going to jail.
Well, Virginia did change some of those rules, and it eventually, when you went on a domestic, if you determined that somebody was the aggressor, then you were really required to place the person under arrest.
Mm-hmm.
And same thing like with a mental subject, at least you could place them under arrest, and we could commit the person to a mental institution for 72 hours for observation. So the whole thing is designed to help and protect the community. And that's what you are. You're the community protector.
We're going to take a short break. We're talking with Richard Gruber on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. He's a retired reserve deputy from Hanover County, Virginia, meaning he did this job for free. We're going to talk more about what he learned, his experience, and how it drives what he does today. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Do you want to be a guest on Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and podcast? It's really quite simple. And before you get into this notion that I'm not a cop, I wasn't a cop, I don't have something to contribute. Well, the show is about investigating crime. That's one aspect of it from the real life perspective of those who did it. And then it's also about trauma, how trauma impacted them. Often crime-based, but not always. Our guests quite often are law enforcement officers, other first responders, military, victims of crime, their spouses or survivors, talking about how trauma impacted them, what happened, how it affected their lives, and how they rebuilt their lives after. If you want to be a guest, just contact me. It's really simple. Send an email to jay@letradio.com. That's jay@letradio.com. Or go to letradio.com and the Contact Us page, and you can get me right there as well. Return our conversation with Richard Gruber on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Very interesting story. I want you to realize this. He was a reserve deputy in Hanover County, Virginia, which is just north of Richmond. When I say reserve deputy, that agency, they didn't get paid. They did not get paid. We already talked about his close call of being shot from the Beltway snipers. We talked about saving lives in auto accidents and domestics and all that thing that we deal with all the time. And I got to ask you this, Richard. One of the things that I've kind of damaged goods about, and my guests on this show quite often say, we're damaged goods, but we're okay with that. And we laugh and laugh and laugh. We're all right. I was a certain guy before police work. I was a certain guy after, and I'm okay with that. That comes with the territory. But one of the things, domestic disputes, domestic arguments, family arguments, we got so many calls that were alcohol related, that were driven by alcohol, that it was a lot of he said, she said drama, and people are screaming. And I've become very intolerant of any he said, she said drama. How about you?
Well, I think that's true, but connecting with something you just said, I would say one of the biggest changes that happened to me is I certainly like to drink alcohol. I won't name a brand unless they're advertising with you, but I do like to drink. But having seen so many people dead from alcohol and, of course, dealing with drunks and fighting, my respect for getting drunk is diminished.
Right.
I don't have any respect for it at all, and I don't like to be around people that are drunk.
No, I don't either. And I gave up drinking many, many years ago. I don't have an issue with it. I have an issue with people who can't handle it and I continue to. And one of the things, this goes back to your early conversation about drunk drivers. One of the things I say all the time is so many lives will be saved. These people knew they were drinking. They knew they had a problem with alcohol. They knew and made a conscious decision to get behind the wheel. Even though we have ride-sharing programs, we get all kinds of things they can use. And yet they act as if somehow they're the victim. And I say this all the time. If you had made one choice differently, one different choice, that person, that family would still be alive. How do you respond to that?
Well, absolutely. And, I think part of the problem is that the bars and restaurants, they don't police that internally as enough. They want the customer to keep buying whiskey, buying drinks, buying beer, and so they perpetuate some of that. And I would love to see a little more regulating at the restaurant or such. But, of course, people say, well, that's my right to drink and do what I want. And, of course, different people have different tolerance levels. But it's something that it's a problem socially, and I wish that society and the community could do a better job in it.
Now, speaking of society, a lot of what people are, and when I say society, a lot of people are fed messages about police. When I say police, that means police officers, sheriff's deputies, other state troopers, you name it, federal agents. I am the stereotypical Neanderthal police officer. I'm Irish Catholic. I am a big guy. I've got a big voice, and I fit a lot of the molds that Hollywood puts out there. But in society, there's such a negative portrayal of police officers. And I got to ask your opinion about this. George Floyd, I don't know of anybody that was okay with that. I don't know of anybody. I don't know if any police officer is okay with Uvalde. I don't know if any police officer is okay with a lot of things that happen. However, when they say that George Floyd, that involves that all police are like that, I take exception to that.
I think you're correct. It's not like that at all. And most police don't behave like that. But unfortunately, and a good friend of mine who is in law enforcement, he kind of focuses on the idea that the media loves to promote those kinds of stories. And, of course, you probably heard the expression, if it bleeds, it leads.
Yeah, that must be a mid-Atlantic thing, because I was big in Baltimore.
Yeah, the news media focuses on all that negativity, and they don't tell the good stories of what law enforcement do.
Right. And the agencies, a lot of them don't. And I'll just tell you an example I went through. Rodney King in L.A., I think that was the early 80s. And somebody in Baltimore started giving me a hard time about it. And I was like, look, that happened in Los Angeles. This is Baltimore, Maryland. I'm not those guys. Why would you lump me into that category? And they had no reply.
Yeah, you're right. It happens.
So one thing you and I do agree on, we actually agree on a lot, but is that our agencies need to be more proactive. When an officer delivers a baby, they need to tell people about that. When they save lives in auto accidents or house fires or whatever it might be, they need to say that they did a good job. And here's where I take a real big point of exception, is when an officer stands tall in a gunfight and is successful with an armed criminal. They need to sit there and say, we got their back. They did a great job.
You're right. And there are so many positive stories that the news media could focus on. But sadly, so often any public information officers in the departments are reacting to negativity about a incident, and they're not telling the positive stories. Right.
And they got to be more proactive. And some have gotten better at that, and some of them are still. Policing by its general nature is very reactionary. We had some guys, and I say guys, men and women again, that were former Navy SEALs that were miserable in police work because they could not get the reaction. They were too aggressive. They were too focused on, I'm going to be proactive. And that could be a great thing, but you've got to measure it. A lot of what you do is you react to what happens in front of you. And a lot of agencies do that as well. One of the things that I don't think a lot of people understand is you say jokingly you're a semi-retired college professor. And colleges, by their very nature, a hotbed of resistance and spreading propaganda quite often wrong about police. How did you deal with that?
Well, first of all, I, of course, had to tell my supervisors that I was doing this as a reserve deputy. And I never had that kind of reaction. And students might find out that I was involved in law enforcement, and I didn't have any reaction from that. I do think, once again, that I have never, and I mentioned this once to a friend of mine, I have never heard a single college professor say something negative about police. Never. I've never seen it, never heard it. And so, again, I think that's a misrepresentation of what the media puts out about protest and such.
Well, a lot of times the media, that's all you hear. We don't hear about the so-called supporters. I agree with you 100%. I'm so glad you did what you did. You transitioned. You said you're a semi-retired college professor. So that means you still teach, but you're an author as well, right?
Yeah, I retired as a dean in the community college system, but I claim that I'm semi-retired because I have taught at Randolph-Macon College in Ashland, and I'm still on the faculty of George Mason University, which I teach virtually because I don't like going up Interstate 95. So I do get to teach at the college level and university level.
Has policing influenced you when it comes, in a good way, obviously, when it comes to being a college professor and writing books, even though they may not be related to police work?
Well, I guess in a way, it certainly has an impact on me and influence, but it doesn't always roll out in the stuff I write. My PhD is in environmental science, and so I focus more on writing about the environment.
Gotcha.
And some of the issues connected to that. And so that's kind of a whole different piece of life. When people find out that I've done this variety stuff, all I can say is I've had a really interesting life. One thing you didn't mention in the interview, I was a hostage negotiator for 9 years.
Oh, wow.
And
I'm going to have you back to talk more about that. And by the way, what's the name of your book that's on Amazon?
The book on Amazon is called The Cicada Olympics.
There we go. Check it out.
And,
it's available on Amazon.
In the South.
We are out of time. Richard, thanks so much for being a guest on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Thank you for your service. All very much appreciated.
Sure.
This was the podcast version of the nationally syndicated Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show, and we are so glad that you decided to join us. Big thanks to our guests for telling their story on the show. 2 simple things you can do. Be sure to check out our website, letradio.com. That's letradio.com. And be sure to follow us or like us on Facebook. Do a search on Facebook for Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. And be sure when you see a post that we put up that you like, that you resonate with, that gets your attention, be sure to share it with your friends. We'll be back in just a few days with another great episode of the show. See you then.